In this video, I am going to discuss what Democrats are going to need in order to take back the Senate based on what they had in previous Senate runs in previous Congresses. I was going to do a video reacting to the Mets and their split, but I realized that so much of it needs actual film to prove that I just don't have lined up right now. Plus, it was a split, so it's not like I could just vent about a Mets loss. It's very weird in this kind of a thing because it's tough to win a 4-game series on the road. So I guess I can't really complain too much. In any case, we're going to talk about the Democrats' fundamental disadvantage in the Senate. First, you need to understand states and how they politically, act. Because looking at, all of this, you look at the states. Trump won 31 states to Kamala's 19 in 2024. In 2020, it was a 25-25 split. In 2016, it was 30-20. Even 2012, a very convincing victory for Obama. He only has 26 states to the 24 carried by Mitt Romney. 2008, one of the biggest Democratic landslides in history, is 28-22 in terms of states. Bush, 2004, a close election, but it's 31-19 in terms of the states. And when Gore won a popular vote, and many say he should have won a 2000 election, it was 30-20. Even if he had won Florida to win the election, it still would have been 29-21 in favor of Bush in terms of the states won. So Republicans have a fundamental advantage that we have to understand is that smaller states are Republican. Look at the states that have 3 or 4 electoral college votes. You'll see that many of these states like Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, these are all Republican-heavy states. Sure, you have Maine and New Hampshire and Vermont, as well as Hawaii, which are all Democratic states and are small, as well as Delaware and Rhode Island. But for the most part, these big states are more Republican states. And when you look at, 5 and whatnot, and you start to get bigger, you'll see that point even more. Smaller states are generally more of Republican heavy, and in the Senate, that's a bit of a problem. Now, at first, you may be thinking that this is a huge overreaction. In the 118th Congress, the Democrats had control 51-49. And you may recall that after that election, Democrats had control 51-49. So you may think this video is a huge overreaction on my part. But then you have to look at where the Senate seats were. You have to realize that Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia all had split delegations. And you have to realize that of, the 6 major swing states, because all the independents caucus with the Democrats, that Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, of all those swing states, all those 5, had entirely Democratic delegations. Democrats severely overextended themselves just to have a, that much of a majority in the 117th Congress. Again, I get that we saw a, the Democrats had a 50-50 split that gave them the majority, as you could see here. But as you could see, you look at it, like you have splits in Montana, Ohio, and West Virginia. Pennsylvania was split back then, but still Arizona, Nevada, Georgia, Michigan, all those states entirely Democratic delegations. And that was obviously, a huge beneficiary to the Democratic Party. But now they don't have that anymore. Political polarization is really reaching an all-time high, and when you look at the flip states, you'll see West Virginia, Ohio, and Montana flip. Now, West Virginia, this was a given because Manchin won in 2018 and won the seat, and then he stopped running. But Ohio and Montana, we saw incumbents get defeated. On the one hand, they were able to make these rates much closer than the presidential results. 3.6 in Ohio and 7.1 in Montana, compared to the presidential results of 11.2 in Ohio and 19.9 in Montana. However, the point still is, though, is that Republicans still won those seats. And without the incumbency advantage, I don't know how easy it is to really maintain these seats. And that's just what sort of makes it tough in that retrospect is that you look at these areas and you see how like these are reliable Republican areas that had Democratic senators. No more. Democrats are unlikely to ever get those seats back for a long, long time. And as it is in the 119th Congress, Democrats are already overextending themselves in a way because of Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, and Michigan having two Democratic senators still. So it's tough in that regard because Democrats have 10 out of 12 seats in the swing in the states that flip back and forth between 2024 and 2020. Of those seats, Democrats have 10 of the 12 when you'd expect that they only have 6 of the 12. But now it's tough because it's like, how are Democrats ever going to get back control of the Senate? We can look at the 2026 U.S. Senate elections, where now we have a Democratic retiree in Illinois as the perfect example as to why it's going to be so tough. Race to the White House is the only one that gives Republicans even a chance of losing, with how small some of these margins are in states that you wouldn't expect to be so close. But basically, everyone knows that Maine is a Democratic-leaning state. Kamala won the state by 7 points. Biden won the state by 9 points. Susan Collins was a bit of a political unicorn because in 2020, she was able to win re-election by 8 points despite all that. But you could see a decline in split-ticket voting. She won by 23 points in 2008, and on the same ballot in 2008, we saw Democrat Barack Obama win Maine by 17 points. Now both margins are getting a lot closer, and Maine is going to be tough. North Carolina is also going to be tough. Between the fact that Tom Tillis is vulnerable to a primary challenge by an unpopular incumbent, and the fact that while North Carolina always leans Republican, it's also always close. We can see this trend in the last 4 elections. Always Democratic and always close. Looking at the Senate races, 2022, it was close. 2020, it was close. 2016, it was still kind of close. 2014, it was still kind of close. Obviously, in 2008, this is the election where Democrats win North Carolina both for the Senate seat, and also Obama does carry the state of North Carolina. But even though it's a Republican-leaning state, the state is absolutely still in play for Democrats. It's absolutely still in play for Democrats. And the state voted to the left of Arizona, a state that Trump could not win in 2020, as you can see here. So North Carolina's in play, but that's only 51-49. And you do have to tap into a state that did vote Republican in the last 4 elections. I know it wasn't by that much, but it still did. And then it's like, what next is there to do? Because you have Ohio, Alaska, Texas, and Florida, all of which race to the White House thinks are in play to flip, but none of the other pundits agree. All the other pundits have Alaska and Florida, as well as Texas. Actually, no, Alaska and Florida they have as safe Republican. And same for Iowa, another state that, could be a bit close and was sort of in that range. Texas and Ohio, we actually are seeing some of the polls saying it could be a bit closer, but not that much closer. And, looking at the results, Texas is a state where Democrats really thought they could flip after the 2020 results, only for it to, for one reason or another, completely bite them in the anus. Florida is a state that has probably shown, the biggest rightward swing of any state in the past decade. Whereas Texas, it was like trending bluer and then shot back up in the Republican direction. And of course, Iowa is another state that, probably one of the biggest shifts from 2012 to 2016. and Ohio too. These are states that used to be swing states, but are now pretty solidly Republican. Ohio is the only one that might be in play based on candidate quality. Alaska, maybe if if they have Mary Plateau to run. So that'll sure get dicey. That'll sure get dicey. But it's like my point is, Maine and North Carolina, they're really only opportunities. 2028, there's a chance that we could see it, but you also have to understand, tough map. North Carolina and Wisconsin are really the only two states that are in play based on how close that they were, and Wisconsin does have a Democrat in the Senate. But along the rest of this map, what opportunities do they have? This is by far the much tougher Alaska seat to get access to, and I don't really see any of the state that really could flip. And same, in 2030, Pennsylvania is really the only vulnerable seat at this point. And that's what makes it so tough. You have all these states, and it's just going to be tough for Democrats to win the Senate back because they have to do a lot more reaching out into Republican states than Republicans have to do on the inroads.